a second season of MISL Weekly. We're back, refreshed after a long off season, ready to go this weekend. And my name's Nicholas Murray. Very pleased to be joined by Chris Economides. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Well, good morning, Nicholas. It's great to be back on the show and excited for the upcoming season.
And a newcomer to MISL Weekly, although if you've been following USL Pro Weekly during the summer, you'll know this voice pretty well. David Wagner. Hey, David.
Nicholas, thanks for having me on MISL as well.
Well, guys, the new season's upon us. We've got the defending champion Baltimore Blast making their first bow, as it were, on a Saturday night against the Rochester Lancers, and they're looking pretty well set for their title defense. Looking over the roster, Mike Lookingland's back, William Van Zala's back, nice addition with Federico Muhin up front. What are we feeling about the Blast as they prepare for the defense of their title?
Well, I'll start off, Nicholas. I mean, I think I've used this adage. It's hard to be the hunted. They're going to have a big target on their backs this year, being the defending MISL champions. I think from a roster perspective, they're pretty much status quo, minus, a huge loss in Michelle Millwood, who's gone on to Syracuse. So I'd be curious to see how they cope with that loss. But I think it's going to be a very balanced league. You've got the three go-to teams per se: Milwaukee, Baltimore, Kansas City. I think you've got Rochester and Syracuse, who, in my opinion, have upgraded. And then you've got the two expansion teams in St. Louis and in Reading. I think St. Louis with Daryl Duran is going to have a pretty sufficient lineup. Really, the unknown, from my perspective, is Reading. But going back to your original question, I think Baltimore's locked and loaded and should be an interesting defense of their championship.
It'll be interesting for me because it's certainly with the absence of Millwood and a couple of other guys moving on, Petar Myers in particular, you've got some of the younger players on that squad who are now going to be asked to step up and take more senior roles. You look at some of the young guys that they kind of brought in to the roster for the first time last year, and there's certainly some opportunity here to get some extra playing time, get some extra minutes, and rack up the stats a little bit for the Blast.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Nicholas. I think what you have here with the Blast is there's a lot of guys that have been in the system. They've been playing under Danny, so they know what it takes. They know the system. They had a chance to make a great playoff run and win a championship last year, so they've been there. But this season, they'll see a little bit more playing time, a little bit more experience behind them. You mentioned a guy like Myers, who was fantastic last year. So I think that they'll step up and they'll be a great team again this year.
And it's not like the secondary scoring that they had there. Guys like Tony Donatelli, Adalto Neto are bad players. Adriano Dos Santos. There's a lot of quality there to replace the absences that they have suffered. So it definitely looks as though they're going to remain a team to beat in this league, and it'll be interesting to see how they shape up against Rochester this Saturday night. Now, speaking of this weekend, and let's talk a little bit about Syracuse. Let's talk a bit about Michael Millwood, because Syracuse is a team that in their first two seasons have been very competitive, but they haven't quite had that tipping point where they've been able to push through and get the wins that they needed to get into the playoffs. There was certainly last season it looked as though they were a solid contender for the playoffs, and then they just had these narrow defeats. I remember a couple of them to the Baltimore Blast, where they lose 2 games to the Blast in overtime, and while everything else is everyone else, Chicago and Rochester, are managing to eke out these narrow victories, the Syracuse wasn't quite able to do that, and that's why they finished 6th instead of potentially finishing 4th. I think they finished 3 games back of the final playoff place last year. So this is a team. Is Millwood the guy that can help push them over the top, as it were?
I think that you hit it right on. I think Syracuse is that team that had so many, even the first season too, it's so many close losses. Some calls that didn't quite go their way that were big at the end of the season that really changed the game for them. But they just couldn't quite finish it out. And I think a guy like Millwood will be huge for them because it will provide a little bit more consistency, a little bit more stability in the back, which I think is what they need. I think that their ability to score goals is proven, and they're bringing back a lot of the guys that do that. But I think adding a little bit more consistency and stability up the middle and in the back to help shore things up and help give up some bad goals that plagued them last season will be huge.
I think the biggest thing with Millwood, he's such a good hold-up player. He's able to create. He's such a strong guy. He's so powerful that it's going to take a little bit of pressure off Neto to replicate his great performance last season, and it's going to offer the opportunity for a guy like Slavisa Ubiparopovic, who didn't have a bad season to any extent, with 50 points last year, but it wasn't quite the kind of progression that I think Syracuse was hoping to see after him being named Rookie of the Year 2 years ago. So having Millwood to play off, I think, is going to be a boon for guys like Ubi Parapovic, who like to come from deep and who are going to certainly has a really powerful outside shot that he'll be able to take advantage playing off the target that Millwood provides.
No, completely agree. I think you're right on. I think. I think it provides that sort of veteran leadership and stability that Syracuse really needs.
I'm not sure that, I don't know Michelle Millwood that well. I don't know. I mean, he's obviously a very good player. I'm not sure he's the type of character person in the locker room that's going to help push him over the top. He obviously is going to help from a goal scoring perspective. As David mentioned, holding up the ball, that's going to help. But they've also had, they lost Ryan Hall, who was their leader back on defense there last year, who's not coming back this year. So, I think overall Syracuse has improved. I think, as David mentioned, they had some very tough losses last year. I think the law of averages has to equal out as it pertains to this franchise. And I think they're going to be a playoff team this year.
Now, a team that did find its way to make at least a little bit of a push, a little bit of progression last year was Missouri, who consistent playoff performer for their first 3 seasons, but always had fallen in the semifinals, hadn't made it to they made it to the championship series last year, did it in dramatic fashion, one of the more memorable pair of games that we've seen, certainly that I've seen in our short term watching indoor soccer. You go back a lot further on that than I do, Chris. But it was impressive. It was impressive to me the way that they were able to push through, and now they've bolstered this roster. They've got pretty much everyone coming back, and now they've got Jason coming, Brian Perez coming in. They've got even more firepower than they did a season ago. Are we expecting to see Missouri contend for not just the championship in the playoffs, but maybe the regular season championship this year?
Yes, and yes. Yeah, no, they're loaded. The experience that they had last year, making it to the finals, obviously pushed them over the hump. Of being able to beat a team like Milwaukee. The finals was a great 2-game series. They were right there in game 2. Couple of late goals by Baltimore. They showed what they can do in forcing, the mini game against Milwaukee. So they were only a goal away from forcing the mini game. So I think that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with this year. Like you said, they've got essentially the entire roster coming back. Plus the league MVP 2 years ago, plus Brian Perez. They're going to be an awfully dangerous team this year.
And a new coach in Vlatko Andonovsky, who was an assistant coach for the Comets previously and did actually a really nice job. If you were watching this throughout the summer in the NWSL with FC Kansas City, tremendous job there. I think they were the regular season champions, and just really, really exciting team to watch. Becky Sauerbrunn and some of the U.S. internationals that they had on that side. So I think he may be able to add. I think it's definitely going to be interesting to see what he brings to the side, whether they can certainly shore up the defensive issues that they had at times last season, where some games they looked absolutely brilliant and they would go out and beat Milwaukee, beat Baltimore. Other games it just really fell flat, especially on the road where they were only 4-9. If they can address that, create a little more consistency, I can see them right up there until the end with Baltimore and Milwaukee contending for the regular season title.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's always interesting when you bring in an assistant coach. I think there's a lot of pros with it, as far as it's someone that's coming in, it's somebody that's familiar with the program, knows how it works there. Is familiar with the players, so he knows how to get the most out of them a lot of times. And then also they're going to have a new perspective about how things have gone and how they want to do things. So I think for Vlatko, being familiar with the program, but also being able to come in with some new, fresh ideas will be a really nice change and upgrade, hopefully, for the Comets if they're looking to have a great season.
Well, to find out a little bit more about that fresh perspective that Andonovski might bring and their preparations for the opening of the season, we were able to talk with Comets defender Brian Harris, and that interview will be coming up just after this break. Well, we're very pleased to be joined now by Missouri Comets defender Brian Harris. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Nicholas, thank you for having me on here.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the great year that you guys had last season, particularly the playoffs. I mean, reaching the championship series, I know you guys came up short, but certainly that series against Milwaukee was one of the more memorable ones I've seen. What was it like to play in?
It's always an exciting time to, especially beating one of the best teams in the league, and they've been around for such a long time. They have great experience. You got to tip your hat to Milwaukee. It's an exciting atmosphere every time you step out onto that field. And like you said, the most memorable games I played in yet was against Milwaukee.
As far as the championship series against Baltimore, obviously that didn't go your way. What were the things that you and the rest of the team took away from that series that you tried to build on this off season?
You think about it. If you never made it to the championship, you'll never know what it was like playing in it. So it was one step. It was a huge step in the right direction, making it to the championship. Yes, it didn't go our way, but we took a lot of positives out. Baltimore team, they happened to beat us, but we were right there. We were a goal or two short. A bounce goes our way. Maybe we come out on top. But yeah, I mean, now you have a long off season to swallow that, and you look forward to this year and say, hey, we need to go at it this year, and we need to get into that championship again.
You guys made a great start to last season, but throughout the year it seemed as though that there was a little bit of inconsistency, which ended up with the team finishing well off the pace as far as the Blast and Wave were concerned, finished at 500 for the regular season. What have you guys done to try and address that and try and create certainly a little more defensive consistency this off season?
Yeah, it was 13-13. We looked 500. I think all the games that we had lost were games that we just didn't play well as a group, as a whole. We just didn't have that team chemistry. I really think in the preseason we've gelled together as a team. The defense has really come together, and our defense is very similar to last year. So guys have been playing together for 3 and 4 seasons now. We know we know how both of us play, and I'm looking forward to this first game on Saturday. It's really a test to see where we're at.
You guys obviously have some really good returning players. Byron Alvarez is back, Vahid Asadpour, Leo Gibson, but I'm pretty sure everyone's very excited to see what Brian Perez and Jason can do, especially Jason coming back to the Comets after his MVP season a couple of years ago. How have those guys fit back into the squad?
It was tough seeing them leave, because I feel like they were a piece of puzzle that we needed. Jason back. Playing against him in Wichita, I just remember defending him every day in practice. He's a great player, great one-on-one player. I'm just happy to have him on my side now. And now I can give him the ball and let him go one-on-one with somebody else, and I don't have to worry about him. Brian Perez is just a great player, great vision, seeing the ball, hitting the ball, and seeing options running off of him. I played with Brian in college, so I'm excited to have them back. And like you said, Leo, Vahid, Byron, Danny's our goalie. We just got huge veteran support on that team.
You've also got a new head coach in Vlatko Andonovski. He was an assistant last year. He's stepping into the lead role this year. What's he been like? What's it been like having him instead of Kim Ronved as the head coach this preseason?
Say that again.
What's it been like having Vlatko instead of Kim in this preseason?
Oh, Vlaco, yeah. Vlaco's, he's a great coach. And he fit last year, being the assistant, very supportive to all the players. He's a great role model. I think he's a great coach. Kim's going to be missed. Kim was a very fantastic coach, very defensive-minded coach. He played in the league forever, had a lot of experience. Having Vlaco there has just been a great addition to the Comets as well. Losing Kim was upsetting, but then having a guy like Vlaco step in and take the job, it's very comforting as a player. Because, when you hear that your coach is leaving, you never know who's going to come in. But having Vlaco there for the past 3 seasons, all right, you know what? We know him. We know how he is, and he's been fantastic.
Now, you mentioned
this preseason.
You mentioned the game this Saturday. Obviously, it looks as though it's going to be a sellout at the Independence Event Center. You've got Milwaukee coming to town. Are we going to see a repeat of the excitement that we saw at the end in the playoffs at the end of last season?
I sure hope so. That is our goal. The arena, Independence Arena, is always a great atmosphere. Speaking with the office staff, who's done a fantastic job selling out this first game, the atmosphere is going to be out of control. I think the roof may come off on the Independence Event Center.
Oh, Brian, what's the biggest key for you guys for this season to, at the end of the season, be holding the MISL Championship trophy?
It's one game at a time. We start with the Waves, see where we're at there. The long-term goal is to be holding that trophy up above our head this year. We got to stay healthy, stay strong, and keep our team goals in mind, and keep plugging away every single day at practice.
Well, Brian, best of luck Saturday. Best of luck for the upcoming season, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I look forward to the season, and good luck to all the teams.
Certainly feels as though there's a lot of optimism surrounding the Comets this year. It definitely feels like they feel as though they can contend to be right up there with Milwaukee and Baltimore. And Milwaukee, the team that they beat, there's a new look for Milwaukee this year. New uniforms, Under Armour coming in, and new owner Sue Black overhauling the look of the team. The players in the jerseys, however, very familiar feel for a lot of them. You've got the Twin Towers in goal with Marcel Feenstra and Nick Vorberg. You've got Heverton and Ian Bennett back up front. And I think they've made some really good additions, especially Carlos Munoz coming over from Chicago. He had 62 points last season, was tied for 10th in the league. This is a team that it always manages, even when it loses players, it manages to cycle new players in, and I'm sure we'll see Carlos Munoz fitting into Keith Tozer's system very, very quickly indeed with the way that they play up in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I think Munoz will be a real spark for them. He was just brilliant last year, and obviously he's what made Chicago go on a lot of the nights during the 2012-13 season. I think that you're right. I think Keith is very familiar with him. Obviously, they played Chicago more than any other opponent during the regular season last year. So I think he's going to take him. He's going to get the most out of Carlos and put in that lineup. But again, it's all a system there. It's not just about one player. Milwaukee, it's a cog in the wheel that Keith turns, and they do a great job every year. So always expecting big things out of Milwaukee.
Yeah, I always agree. I think Milwaukee is obviously one of the flagship franchises. Keith Tozer, unbelievable tenure there, year in, year out. I don't know how many championships they've won now, but he's gotten younger this year. Josh Reif is gone. Obviously, Joe Hamas retiring. He's brought in, like you said, a Carlos Munoz. He's brought in another interesting addition, I think, is J.C. Banks, who's going to come in and I think is going to help their. He keeps adding these pieces of the puzzle, and he's transformed that team from like an older sort of has-been. They won all those championships. But he's gotten younger. And again, I think they're one of the favorites to win the championship again this year.
The guy I'm actually really curious to see is because I thought before he got injured last season he was definitely looking very bright. Is Judson McKinney?
Yep.
I think he's a very bright young player that could definitely do a very good job. But you're right. You mentioned a J.C. Banks. You look at a guy like Tony Waltz who comes in with MLS experience, having played for the Chicago Fire. So he's a guy. These are guys that can come in, plug into the system, and definitely fill the shoes, as it were, of the guys that have left. It's certainly congratulations to Joe Hammers, and hope he has a very nice retirement after 10 great seasons for the Wave. And then good luck to Josh Reif as he becomes the third head coach of the Rochester Lancers. This is a very interesting Lancers team because we know they can score. We've seen what Mauricio Salas and Doug Miller have done the past 2 seasons. And it's a team that did get enough secondary goal scoring, I think, last year to be a playoff contender. But I think Josh Reif has got his work cut out for him to try and make sure that the team is more responsible defensively and doesn't give up, as it did last season, a league high in points. And that's the biggest thing. That to me was the biggest thing keeping Rochester from being a playoff team for a second consecutive season.
Well, that and the fact that they couldn't beat Syracuse last year.
That's
but
very
no,
true.
I think they made an excellent selection in Josh Reif. Truly one of the class acts, both indoor, outdoor, over the course of the years. Excellent selection there. I think he's going to come in and be a stabilizing effect, within that organization. And I think it comes back, if you remember last year, they didn't have Pat Hannigan for pretty much the entire season last year. I think if you've got a healthy Pat Hannigan, a stabilizing force like Josh coming in there to sort of calm the waters, obviously Doug Miller, unbelievable season last year, Mauricio Salas, Andrew Hoxie coming back this year, I think is going to help, like as you mentioned, secondary scoring.
Definitely.
But I think the key is going to be Pat Hannigan. I think that they lacked in goalkeeping last year. And I think if he's healthy the entire season, Rochester's going to be a playoff team this year.
Alongside Hannigan, the two other guys for me are Pedrinho and then Stephen Basso, who were both all rookie defenders last year. Can they make that progression in their second years to provide a little more stability back there? We know what both of those guys can do on the offensive end, and certainly Basso has had another fine summer for the Harrisburg City Islanders in USL Pro. But the focus really needs to be on keeping their defensive shape a little bit better, and especially not giving up as many counter-attack goals as I remember them doing last year. That's the biggest thing for me. Are they prepared to sacrifice a little more? Are they prepared to block more shots? So these are things that I think Josh, coming from Milwaukee, and the attitude that Milwaukee has to defense, will be working hard to instill in this squad.
No, I think you're right on point. I think coming in, having that experience, obviously at an outdoor and indoor level, will be huge. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders, and they'll be able to have some good coaching stability there in Rochester, and hopefully we see Josh being the coach there for a long time. So definitely, like Chris said, I think Mission 1 is beating Syracuse this year, and then getting back to the playoffs for Rochester, I think it's very attainable.
Well, Mission 1 is beating Baltimore in
beating
their
Baltimore,
opening
you're
game,
right.
which
Step one.
should be an excellent opening game. I think excellent to see where both of those two teams are as we start the new season. But we start the regular season on Friday night with one of our 2 expansion teams, the Pennsylvania Roar. Now, you mentioned earlier, Chris, we're not quite sure what this team's going to look like completely yet, but we have a decent idea. They've got some interesting pieces, some players coming back to the indoor game after a few years off, like Peter Pappas in goal. But the 2 guys I'm really looking at here are the 2 defenders, Chris Williams and Patar Myers. Myers in particular, just to provide that experience, that leadership that they showed for the Blast as they won the championship last year. Williams was a late season addition, but I thought he was excellent in the few games that he played for the Blast. If those 2 guys can help hold things together defensively, this team hopefully has a chance to be in more games than it isn't, as it looks to find its way through its first season.
I think self-admittedly, in speaking to majority owner Glenn Goldstein, they're about a month or 2 behind overall from a franchise perspective there. some of their marketing, some of their ticketing, sponsorships. I think as we hit the holidays, they're going to start hitting their full stride, and I think the similar notion will be from a team perspective. A lot of unknowns. As you mentioned, there's probably 3 or 4 or 4 or 5 ex-Philadelphia Kicks players that are on the roster, and talking to some of the coaches throughout the league, their names are recognizable. But again, I think it's going to take some time for them to gel. It won't be a total discombobulation, because obviously these guys have played indoor. There's not a huge influx of outdoor players coming there, but it's going to be an acclimation period.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be an acclimation period where these guys get back up to speed and find their legs again a little bit in some circumstances. For St. Louis, they are the one team that I believe doesn't play this weekend, so they have a little bit of extra time to get things together. But it certainly looks on paper as though things could be coming together pretty decently for this team. You have Jeff Ritchie in goal. You have Jamar Beasley and an experienced veteran like Dan Antoniuk in attack. You have a pretty nice-looking team on paper here. What are you expecting to see out of the ambush, Dave?
I think the expectation's a little bit higher for them as an expansion team. I don't know if they've quite constructed the lineup that we saw last season with an expansion team in Chicago, but I think that the lineup that they put together is solid. I think they're going to compete, and I also think that it's going to be a situation where they grow a little bit as a team. Obviously, anytime you're starting fresh, you're bringing together a group of guys, there's going to be that acclimation period that we talked about. I think it'll be a little bit quicker for St. Louis. I think it also helps having somebody like Daryl Duran in there. Obviously, he knows the market, played in St. Louis. He's been around the game. I think he knows what it takes to put together a good team, so I'm looking for big things from Daryl this season as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know Daryl pretty well, Chris. I mean, what are you expecting to see from him as far as coaching and the leadership he'll provide for the ambush?
You couldn't have had a better selection for a coach there. Obviously, Daryl, an indoor legend, a St. Louis legend, the perfect selection by owner Andrew Haynes there. And I'll tell you, I think they're going to be a solid team from day one. I don't think there's a lot of acclimation process here. I think there's a lot of local talent also there that's going to come to the surface. St. Louis is obviously a hotbed for local bred born players there. So I think when you factor all those together with some of the signings that they've made, like an Antoniuk, who's a huge towering forward, with the Jeff Ritchie in goal, who had a great season last year in Chicago, Jamar Beasley, Daryl's savvy and knowledge of the game, I think they're going to be a playoff contending team.
Big chance for Jamar Beasley, I think. I think he really wants to get back on track. I mean, he had a couple of down seasons, particularly last year, but now he's back in St. Louis, somewhere where he's had success before. I think he's very excited. I think he's got to be excited to kind of get back into a rhythm and find his scoring touch again.
Yeah, we all know the talent and the ability that Jamar has, and obviously he's been around for a while, so he knows the game. He knows how it works here in MISL. So he's the right type of person that could get off, find his footing, and really have a great season there in St. Louis.
Well, St. Louis is off this weekend, but we do have 3 matches to open the season, starting Friday night with the Syracuse Silver Knights visiting the Pennsylvania Roar. That game is available, as all of the games this season will be, on YouTube, our new video platform. And then Saturday night, we have the Rochester Lancers hosting the Baltimore Blast, and the Missouri Comets hosting the Milwaukee Wave. These are 3 very interesting matchups. So which one are you looking forward to most, Chris?
Well, I'm going to be at 2 of the 3. Fortunate enough to be able to go to Reading to see the franchise opener for the Roar. So that I think that'll be an intriguing matchup. And then again, that from a perspective of what we see on the field. And then the other 2 matches, they're expecting a sellout crowd in Missouri for the Comets versus the Wave. Should be an unbelievable atmosphere there as those 2 teams rekindle their rivalry after the great finish that we had last year. And then Rochester and Baltimore, who will become 2 very heated rivals. Expecting another great crowd in Rochester of over 5-6, close to 7,000 people there. So we're looking forward to this opening weekend. My most intriguing game is going to be the Missouri and Milwaukee game. Again, those 2 teams a lot of the teams don't like each other. I think those two teams from the natural rivalry clearly don't like each other. I think Milwaukee's going to have a little bone to pick after how they were ousted by Missouri last year, and what better way to spoil their home opener by coming up with a big win in Missouri.
How about you, David?
I'm going to have to go with the Rochester-Baltimore game. I think any time that you have the defending champ opening up, it's always intriguing. Obviously, we talked about at the beginning of the program some of the moving pieces that Baltimore has, so it's going to be interesting to see how they reform. Then Rochester also with some moving pieces. I think that, again, Rochester's a team that's always right on the edge of competing for that playoff spot. How Josh Reif comes in and shapes that team in his coaching debut will be interesting, and I'm looking forward to that one.
Definitely looking forward to Friday night's game, I've got to say, because we're in a similar scenario to this time last year where there was a lot of expectation, a lot of hopefulness for Syracuse, and then they came out in their opening game and lost to an expansion franchise. Certainly they won't want to replicate that performance. They'll want to get out on a winning start. So I think this is actually a big game for Syracuse, although against an expansion team that maybe certainly should on paper be a team that they should handle pretty easily. Now, as I mentioned, all of the games this year are on YouTube, and you can look for a more in-depth look at all of these 3 games on Friday morning as we as we get ready to do our first MISL weekend preview video. But until then, Chris, David, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nicholas. It's always a pleasure, and it's a lot of fun doing the show.
Safe travels up to the Northeast for the 2 games this weekend.
I've got my parka packed.
And thank you to producer Seth for putting all of this together, and we hope you enjoy all the action this weekend. But until next time next week, thanks for joining us. Bye for now.